Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 10 of What If Naruto was sent to the past by the Shinigami. If you guys enjoyed this What If, and want to see part 11 of it, comment down below, and let me know. The like goal for this video is 250 likes. So like this video, to let me know that you're interested in this series, and you want the next part. And go ahead, and check out other What Ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. The tiniest of changes alter everything. Even the smallest ripple, the merest of thoughts, can change the world. Paradise or perdition. Peace and war. Heaven. Hell. When one seeks to alter the past, they must be prepared for such things. Not just a change in the life of one era, but the lives of many. And when those changes are many. Well, let's have a look at them, shall we? Whilst Naruto and his men fought and died in the land of water, in Konoha, the changes he had wrought began to bear fruit. All those earth-shattering changes, silent for so long, began to move once again. Some of his seemingly inconsequential decisions, simple acts of kindness, bore fruit in his absence. Lives were lost. Alliances were gained. Bonds bound and unbound. Some might call this an interlude, the calm before the storm. That dreadful moment of peaceful, complacent silence before the plunge into the abyss. Call it what you will, dear reader, but it is, nevertheless, an integral part of the story. Every fiber of her being told Sakura to run. Run. Flee. Get away from here. She wanted to bolt. She faced down assassins, distant envoys from foreign nations. She'd gone toe-to-toe with enemy shinobi, been wrangled into an unexpected marriage as a consort, and impossibly, found love and the very strong possibility of a child, as she judged her courses correct here in the Hidden Leaf. Her life had been laid out on the line countless times, and each time she had done her duty without fear, without hesitation. Run, 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 run. Yet the prospect of this, of walking into unfamiliar territory, was enough to make her shake like a leaf itself, sending anxious tremors shooting up and down her spine. She wished Naruto were here to comfort her, but no, he was off in the mist playing hero, taking some of the Leaf's best in Mikoto with him. Sakura didn't begrudge him his actions, far from it, she admired his determination and dedication to the village. He was fierce as a tiger when it came to keeping their home. But she would have sincerely appreciated a little of that heartfelt sincerity for herself right about now. The thought of going in there, without weapons, not being allowed to use her bloodline to defend herself, it was terrifying. Sakura fidgeted nervously at the thought. This is a horrible idea, she muttered to herself, clutching the book to her chest. Absolutely horrible, why did I agree to this? She felt strange enough in her new flak jacket and Konoha attire, the heshiate resting quite uncomfortably around her neck like a noose, but the reassurance that she was now officially, as a gallant Jiraiya had put it, part of the family, did precious little to quell the nauseating butterflies fluttering about within her breast. Indeed, the idea of entering a hot zone like this threatened to send her breakfast lurching back up her. She leaned against the wall for support, stubbornly steeling herself. That better not be morning sickness. No, it's too early. It shouldn't even be possible. Having second thoughts. A startled gasp forced itself between her lips. Sakura spun around with a start, startled to find that she wasn't alone. Hokage-sama. Sarutobi Hiruzen, divested of his hat and robes, smiled pleasantly at her. I thought I'd see how you were doing. You're going to be late, you know. Without the vestments of his office, he looked very much like a simple civilian, Sakura thought, though she knew in her heart nothing could be further from the truth. So I just have to tell them what to do. Not too much, he advised. You have to smile and wave at them too. She groaned in horror, and Sarutobi, hearing this, chuckled in grandfatherly amusement. You'll do just fine. With all her might, she fought the urge to hiss at the chuckling old man. Him. He was the one who'd suggested this in the first place. Turter. Bamboozled. The memory was not a fond one, just thinking about it was enough to get her hot and bothered all over again. As she'd know this was to be her fate, she'd never have stepped in that blasted office to begin with. Slowly his gaze shifted to Sakura. The Kunoichi looked back, blinked, and asked, what? Sarutobi began to smile. Really smile. Understandably, Sakura was somewhat nervous at this. Tsunade looked at them and suddenly had the same thought. Well, I can't do it. I'm busy with the medical corps. And she's the only one who has any real knowledge of Suna and their techniques. But we're allies, now. They gave her a stern look. But for how long? Tsunade pressed. Once this war ends. That aside, she would make a fine replacement, the Hokage agreed equably. Sakura was horrified, but she couldn't see an escape. Now just a minute. I understand congratulations are in order, in that regard. Sakura bristled, drawn back to bitter painful reality by those easy words. Did he know about the impending wedding? Or the fact maybe, just maybe, she was with child? No, that was impossible. Not even Naruto knew a thing about that. Who knew? Naruto venerated the old man regardless, though she couldn't fathom why. She supposed the least she could do was feign a smile for him. Why, thank you. Hiruzen glanced at Sakura, who was still watching the door like a cat at a mouse hole. A foreign kunoichi was not easy to manipulate, and Pikura had proven surprisingly resistant to the idea. But now that she was here, she seemed to be just looking for an excuse to bolt. Thankfully, the bell rang before she could do just that. Well, go on then. Hate this so much. Gathering her materials in hands, she pushed open the doors and stepped inside, painfully aware of them swinging shut behind her as she stepped into the classroom. Heart beating like a jackhammer, she mentally willed herself to calm down lest she panic. Once there, she faced down the horde of little monsters, sucked in a breath, and began. Hello, my name is Pikura. She gazed out on the sea of young faces, and forced herself to continue, before they could start asking questions about her, or the infamous Black Death, that would soon be her husband. One never knew what manner of questions a child would ask, after all. And, as of today, I will be your instructor in the art of ninjutsu. Quietly, she prayed that Kushina was faring better with her assigned task than she. You did what? Kushina was not, in fact, faring better. She was faring worse. Much worse. Well, I may have that's my ear. Yahiko had the good sense of mind to cringe as Kushina dutifully dabbed at his cheek, savagely scrubbing away the dirt and grit and paint off his face. He was also smart enough to keep his yappers shut when she frog marched him off the porch and into the living room, away from the Anbu who had just so rudely shown up with the orphans in tow. Neither had the gall or the lack of common sense to snap at the Jinchuriki when she kicked the door shut in their faces. Stop struggling, kid. Ibiki called from his perch on the couch, glancing up from his book just long enough to catch the boy's eye. You'll only make it worse on yourself. Iwaki barked a laugh of his own, glancing up from his garden out back. What did they do this time? He called. That's what I intend to find out, Tabane. Kushina spared him a glance, and a rueful smile. With only a few weeks of practice under his belt, he was coming into his own, and making excellent use of his Mokuton towering tree in the back, certainly bespoke to his blossoming skills. Their current living arrangements were still woefully small for her liking, considering that Naruto was temporarily forcing them to share an apartment with Yahiko and the others, while he was gone. At least it was better than the Uchiha compound. Ugh. She shuddered at the thought. Mikoto Ni was like a sister to her, but the way some of her clanmates looked at her behind her back, calling her demon, whore and the like, she simply didn't feel comfortable there, despite Naruto and Mikoto's efforts to make it to the contrary. Not too much longer, she reminded herself. Naruto, until he'd left for the mist, had been hard at work constructing a home for them all, this strange little family of theirs. Even with his absence, he'd hired a number of capable craftsmen to continue his work. Kushina had been sworn to silence, promised that she would not peek, but in the end, she, like Hashi and the others, had given in to temptation. She'd seen the grand manner taking shape. It was glorious. She couldn't wait to move in with him. Around her she still heard the occasional scrape of a saw in the distance, the pounding of a hammer and the shouts of the foreman. The finished product would be a sight to see, indeed, but for now. Stay, she called at Nagato and Konan, seeing them slinking off out of the corner of her eye. I'll deal with you two later. Then her eyes locked back on Yahiko. The poor boy paled. He and his fellow orphans were indeed noticeably absent from class today, not because of the respective age gap between them and their fellow students, nor simply because Naruto wasn't there to supervise them, but due to the trio's most recent misadventure. Without the Uchiha's watchful eye on him, Yahiko seemed to get into all sorts of mischief, oftentimes dragging poor Nagato and Konan along for the ride. Ordinarily, this wouldn't have been too much of an ordeal for those tasked with watching him. Today, however, well, Kushina intended to find out just what he'd done, post-haste. Tell me. Or what? He challenged, grinning. When Nagato opened his mouth to answer, he shot him a glower. Quiet, you. Just because she's your cousin or whatever. Or I will bite you. Kushina continued, looming over him now as her hair swayed in some unseen breeze, eyes aglint with wrath. Not with my teeth, though. That'd be rude. With my fingers. How do fingers bite, you ask? She asked, grinning at his questing look. Simple. Chomp. The resulting squeal of laughter nearly sent Konan and Nagato giggling as well. Not Yahiko. Oh. Okay. It was just a little prank. And what does that mean? Kushina asked, grinning as she continued to tickle him. Stubborn to the end, the orphan resisted. Guess. No, tell me. She insisted, her smirk growing at the mere mention of mischief. I hate guessing. Besides, I'm in charge of you while Naruto-kun is away. You have to. Unless you want me to keep tickling. After what felt like an eternity of this, the boy's resistance crumbled. Alright. I give. I shouldn't have to tell you, though. Come on. Yahiko smirked triumphantly. I painted the stone faces. Kushina gulped. You did not. Did too. Did not. Ah, Kushina-san. Konan intervened gently, trying unsuccessfully not to laugh. He did. She pointed out the window for emphasis. There was a blur of red and cyan as everyone scrambled out to see the boy's work, a moment of terrible silence, punctuated by the sound of someone trying and failing to stifle her glorious giggles. Okay, that was pretty good. Yahiko grinned at them, resplendent with joy. What can I say? I'm brilliant. Kurore also felt that she was quite brilliant. Every step felt as though she were walking on cloud 9, upswings of confidence boosting her normally pitiful self-esteem to wondrous new heights. She felt as though she could sing, shout from the rooftops. Perhaps it had something to do with the tiny creature perched upon her right shoulder. The wholehearted knowledge that she'd finally gotten the scorpions to accept her at long last. Months of painful training and agonizing anxiety had paid off in full, made visible by the little black scorpion known as Kuro, a fitting name, all things considered, seated firmly on her back. She could have chosen to ride on a larger summons like a sashi, but that would have been rude. All of her hard work had been paid back in spades. She, like her mother before her, was now the proud successor of her family, a full-fledged summoner. Against all odds she'd successfully summoned the scorpions and only just yesterday, forged a contract with their leader. She was now worthy to summon them as she wished. Words alone could not hope to express the extent of her joy, her bliss, the knowledge that she was making something of herself. Someone. Oh, this is so wonderful. A little twirl in the aisle nearly sent poor Kuro spinning off her shoulder and flying into a bookshelf. The tiny summons hissed his indignation as he clung to her for dear life. Hey, watch it, he jabbed at her with his stinger, eliciting a tiny twinge in her cheek. Even the pinprick of pain wasn't enough to deter Kuro. Sorry, she grinned, resisting the urge to jump again and raise her voice in the quiet halls. She couldn't wait to tell Naruto-kun, to show him all she'd learned. But that would have to wait until he returned from the mist, and until then, he'd assign her a terribly important task. He claimed to trust no one else with this, a task uniquely suited to her, what some might have once called unimpressive. Skillses. Why, you ask? Because Kurore loved to read. It was such a silly thing, really, and it had seemed so unimportant at the time. Ever since she'd been a little girl she'd loved books, more so after the death of her mother. Book indeed, history itself were a safe haven into which one might retreat. In books you could escape, leave behind the world for another, happier one even. She retreated into them, seeking sanctuary and solace when none were to be found in the real world. It could even be said that she loved them. She loved Konoha's library even more. There was so much knowledge here, tales of time long past and the village immemorial. Photographic memory was something prized by, and Kunoichi in Kurore's mind was right up there with the best. Unlike most, she had but to read something once, and then it was forever burned into her brain. Naturally, it wasn't a perfect process. She could only memorize so much in a single day, but for the mission assigned her, she was certain a day was all she would need. Maybe two. Naruto had pleaded really, as they lay in bed one morning after a rapturous bout lovemaking her to research Konoha's history, as well as any pertinent information related to clans with unique bloodlines. Though she may have been the most soft-spoken of the group, this was where her other talents shone. With that thought, she returned her attention to the shelves, adding another volume to the ever-growing stack she held in her arms. She was determined to read them all before Naruto returned. So fixated was she on said task, she almost failed to notice when someone else rounded the bend, until... Oof, hey. Not again. Kurore squealed. A startled cry as the books went flying out of her arms, launched skyward. Kurore instinctively braced herself, but a feminine grunt answered her, followed by several muted thuds. When she dared to open her eyes at her intrepid attacker, she found herself staring up into shockingly bright green eyes, framed by shockingly pink locks. And there, nestled firmly in either hand, held like massive saving platters, were books. Her books actually. But her eyes were soon drawn elsewhere. Clearly attuned by her garb, the intruder seemed almost bemused by her accident, now that it had ended, a small smile playing at her otherwise pale face. Her figure was almost boyish, enough to make Kurore feel well endowed by comparison in her simple blouse and skirt. Her jaw clicked open a bit, her neck flushing at the thought. Are these yours? The Kunoichi asked at last. Oh, yes. Thank you ever so much, miss. Haruno, the pinket grinned, setting the books down on a nearby table and offering a hand. Haruno Mabuki. Kurore beamed, happily accepting the offered palm. I'm Kurore. Pleased to meet you. Kurore. The pinket's head tilted, considering. Then revelation dawned. Ah, it's you. Me? The brunette blinked, momentarily baffled. Yeah, you're the one with the scorpion contract, right? Her eyes shifted to the minute Kuro still perched on her shoulder. Gotta be oi. She swiftly withdrew her finger when the scorpion took a stab at the digit. Oh, you're a feisty little thing. Do you think I could learn to summon one of them? I've always been fascinated with summoning jutsu, but we've had so few contracts until recently. Kurore blinked again, momentarily taken aback by the inundation of words. Quite the chatterbox, this girl. She seemed amiable enough though, and the gleam in her eyes was sincerely earnest. Kurore beamed, suddenly inspired. I suppose I could teach you. She never felt so confident in all of her life. Confidence. There was a time when Hashi had quailed at such a word. The first time she ever saw Naruto, her heart caught in her throat and her stomach dropped faster than one could say love at first sight. She'd been captivated, awed and knocked sideways by the depth of her feelings for this strange man. In many ways, it felt as though she knew him, as though some small part of her soul were rejoicing at seeing a long-lost friend or lover come back home. Perhaps that was when the first seed of her newfound confidence had truly been planted, or perhaps much later. Whatever the case, confidence felt good. Damned good. She had never understood the concept of such a thing until recently, because, before she'd met Naruto, she'd had none. A life of high expectations and constant ridicules had worn her down over time, grounded both her mind and spirit until she felt like little more than an ant in the eyes of the elders. Yet in the space of less than a year, he built that tiny anthill of her self-esteem into a towering mountain, tall and implacable. She felt no shame in admitting that she needed the encouragement, someone to believe in her, encourage her. Just one person was all it took. Indeed, she felt proud now. Strong. Confident. Not arrogant, mind you, like other members of her house, but enough for her to brush off the dust on her skills, polish them up, spread her wings and soar. That was why, today, Hiashi found himself eating fists for breakfast. He'd come into the spar expecting a swift and decisive victory before the watchful eyes of the Hyuga elders. He was completely unprepared for the right hook that came screaming out of nowhere to bloody his nose. It was the second happiest day in Hashi Hyuga's life, the first being when Naruto had offered to better instruct her on her taijutsu. She thought it odd then that he knew so much of the gentle fist style and still did now, but that tiny worry was overshadowed by the dull California ruinage of broken cartilage. Hiashi screamed, staggered, stumbling backward and clutching at his bloodied face. What is the meaning of this? His voice emerged as nasal whine, angry and harsh. That was not the traditional style. A haze of discontented murmurs rose up from the assembled elders. Hashi scoffed. The elders could go hang, because she wasn't here to prove herself for them, or the right of succession. She was doing this for herself. That shy, stuttering girl was no more, and today she would show them all. Of course it wasn't, she replied primly, bouncing on the balls of her feet. It's a new style. My style. Why you? He sputtered, lunging. Too slow. Hashi flowed like water, rippling around the blow, and driving her outstretched palm deep into the man's solar plexus. Hiashi dropped with an audible wheeze. That was all it took. There was no need for a follow-through. Indeed, the second attack wasn't even necessary. Had she truly hit him that hard? Surely she must have, for her opponent lay curled into a fetal position upon the floors, emptying the contents of his stomach onto the ground. She nudged him with her foot and was completely prepared when he lunged up and struck out at her. Kaden. What followed had Hiashi wishing he'd stayed down. Hashi spun, blindingly fast, expelling chakra from every pore. At such range, the rotation cut ribbons of flesh from him, smashed him into the ground, and all but launched him into the compound wall with a harsh crunch. Then she waltzed right up to him, and did it again. The elder Hyuga gave a truncated half-grunt, half-squeal, as he was propelled into the air a good foot and a half before being flattened a moment later just outside the compound. Hashi calmly stepped out after him, his swing, the slight tack-tack-tack of her footfalls eliciting a sharp flinch from the male. He was afraid of her, she realized, she could see it in his eyes. This knowledge gave her just the slightest bit of pleasure, it did. The man who, in a different age, might have once been her husband, barely managed to raise his head at her approach. I won't kill you unless it's absolutely necessary. Hashi cocked her head aside like a dog listening to a new sound, an innocent smile wreathing her pretty face. Will it be necessary? Hiashi tried to reply, but all that his body would surrender was a small, squeaking negative. Where had this confounded confidence come from? I'm waiting. Hiashi blanched. No, not at all. Then concede. The words died in his throat as her foot crushed down on his groin. All the men and a few of the women winced as the ensuing crack. Hiashi's voice jumped 3 octaves, then he collapsed upon himself like a snail into his shell. Every man in the courtyard, with the exception of Hashi herself, winced anew. That stomp would have dropped a bear. Concede. She smiled sweetly. He did, in fact. He conceded all rights to her, and forfeited his potential claim as head before the venerated eyes of the elders themselves. A stretcher was brought out to carry the disgraced Hyuga away, and that, as they said, was that. That was amazing, Nisama. Hashi felt her first real, non-threatening smile of the day bloom as Nozomi squealed, leaping to her feet. Oh, sister. You look wonderful. He didn't hurt you at all, did he? Let me see. She hurried over to examine her best friend, and most cherished sibling from all angles, even going so far as to run a quick hand over her ass. Hashi startled, her pale face flushing at the bold behavior from her normally shy sister. Thus embattled, she swatted the hand away. Nozomi. Her sister giggled, her cheeks pink with delight. Sorry. I don't know what's gotten into me. I've just never seen you like that. It was so inspiring. Say, then her eyes narrowed. Hashi gulped. Oh. She knew that look. It was the look. That look was nothing good. Sure enough, when Nozomi spoke again, her normally quiet voice had dropped to a lustrous purr. I hear you and Naruto Dono were spending an awful lot of time together before he left. Do I hear wedding bells? Hashi sputtered. Don't you have a mission with Minato-san in a few hours? Nozomi brightened. Oh, right. I do. I simply must get ready. She watched her go, noticing the slight spring in her little sister's step. Nozomi was practically glowing, such was her glee. And now going now too. Hashi wondered about that. She'd known for some time that the last Namikaze was Wing her sibling, though she suspected they were for reasons untoward. But this was different. Had Minato finally. Her eyes bulged slightly, tingling with the Byakugan. He had. Hashi's jaw opened to tell her sister, then closed again, thinking better of it. No, it was not her place to tell her sister that she was with child. It was still very early, and likely wouldn't be noticed without undue scrutiny until a few weeks. The clan would likely not approve, any more than they did of her so-called alliance, with the rising star of the Uchiha clan. Maker, that was going to a bitter battle once she broke the news to them. The thought made her sigh. Not just for herself and Naruto, but for the agony she knew her sister would one day have to endure to get what she wanted. That, of course, assumed Minato wouldn't break her heart. I wonder how he's doing. Jiraiya was waiting for Minato when he reached the training grounds. He meant to get in a bit of a warm-up before his mission this evening. Fate had other plans. A cold knot of dread wound itself up inside the Chunin's gut when he saw his old mentor perched upon the log. He hadn't been expecting the recently crowned Sannin to simply appear out of thin air. Worse, his face was set in a no-nonsense frown, a sure sign trouble was afoot. Idly, he noticed the older man had a large scroll unfurled in hand. He seemed to be reading it, but at the sound of his approach, he snapped it shut and placed it firmly against his back. He was not smiling. Sit in, kid. But, sit. It was not a question, nor was the finger stabbing at the log. Minato reluctantly complied, taking a place beside his mentor. For a long moment, both master and student were silent. A chill breeze pushed through the browning grass of the field, heralding winter. The blonde bit back a shiver despite his long sleeves, for the chill bit to the bone. But no so much as what came next. We need to talk. About what? That look. It reminded him that his sensei was more than a self-proclaimed super pervert who enjoyed writing dirty novels and watching hot springs. He was an accomplished ninja, and when he was serious, enemies fell before like wheat from chaff. That deadly intense glare lasted all of a moment longer, before collapsing on itself. Minato. Jiraiya looked briefly miserable, and then determined. I understand that you're banging the daylights out of that Hyuga girl. I understand that you're still pining after Kushina despite that fact. I understand that you don't like Naruto. No, not yet. He swiftly held up a hand, to forestall the imminent argument. But, look, I suppose what I'm trying to say is this. You need to ease up. Whether you like him or not, he's done a hell of a lot of good for the village. You know it, I know it, and so does Kushina. See, there's the look again. You do still care about her, don't you? Yet you don't see any problem in playing with someone's heart. Minato waffled, choosing silence over an answer. Jiraiya pressed on. He's good for her, you know. He doesn't seem to care about her situation. And that's good. For her? Odd, Jiraiya thought. His apprentice sounded oddly calm. For everyone. He answered, trying to ignore the sudden unease he just felt. He's not a bad person. Damn, I don't think he has an evil bone in his body. But these inquiries you're making, all these missions you've been taking from Koharu and Hamura, this trouble you seem so intent on stirring up, I need to know that it'll end here. We can't afford that division now. I can forgive you for what happened that one night, but trust me when I say you need to put this behind you. This kind of anger, it'll eat you up inside, until there's nothing left. Oh? Minato drawled dangerously. You forgive me. Jiraiya stiffened. Something awful was going to happen. Forgive me. Hey. He exploded like an elemental grenade. Well, fuck your forgiveness, and fuck you too, Teach. Minato screamed out as he leapt up from the log, gesturing explicitly with both hands. None of you understand. He's nothing. Nobody. Yet after only a few months, most of the village worships the ground he walks on. Ha. He laughed then, and it was an ugly sad bitter thing. He just swooped in and Kushina changed. She wouldn't even give me the time of day after that. You don't understand. All she wanted was him. I am nothing to her now. I can't stand it. I hate it. And no one thinks to question who he really is, what he's up to in the first place. The Sannin's mouth dropped open in shock. He'd had no idea. So fuck off. Minato shouted. I don't give a shit about your forgiveness. You, or anyone else. I don't need it. I don't want it. You can take it and shove. And then he was there, closing on his student, before he could spout treasonous things. The air rushed out of Minato in a wheeze, replaced by the pain of the knuckles pressing into his stomach. He doubled over against the limb, gasping for breath and finding none. I see I've been too gentle with you. The sage sighed. With all his remaining strength, Minato raised his gaze, to glare up at his sensei. What does that mean? The man's sweet, sinister smile was possibly the most terrifying, horrifying thing he'd ever seen. It means your new training begins now. Whap. Jiraiya's hand descended mercilessly, knifing into the boy's neck with such force, that the boy only saw blur. The Sannin sighed softly above him, sking like a disappointed parent. Then Minato felt himself being lifted, as though he weighed no more than an impertinent child, sling over the man's shoulder. A series of faint, admonishing words rose, vanishing like a dream. You weren't ready, after all. We'll have to work on that. Don't worry, I'll leave a note for Nozomi-chan. Minato groaned, insensate where he lay. Where are you taking? We're going on a bit of a trip, you and I, came the reply. Don't worry, I'm going to bring you back to your senses, or die trying. I owe your pa that much, at least. Another groan. God damn it. Leave it to Jiraiya-sensei to lead him into another training trap. It's a trap. Those words felt like the understatement of a lifetime, but they described the situation perfectly in the land of water. Don't just stand there. Move, 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 move. Get behind me. Now. Water users in the back. Earth in front. Mikoto, you too. Come on people. Move it. Naruto barked out orders even as the forest around them bristled with enemy ninja. Puddles vomited Kirigakure shinobi like water cockroaches, others bounding in from branches and boughs with startling speed. Just as swiftly Naruto created 24 clones of feet that got him his fair share of stunned looks and directed them to hurt the civilians and other non-combatants to the south. Anyone not willing to fight, stay back, he shouted. We'll hold the line. And just how do you plan to do that? Tsukumo drawled, irate. We can't fight an army. Naruto rounded on him, eyes flashing. I'm not going to let these people be massacred. If you don't like it, you can sod off. Inoichi. Shikaku. Slow them down. I don't care how you do it. Thankfully both men set about doing just that without questioning him. Kakashi's father proved more mulish than most. This is suicide. Tsukumo pressed, shoving forward. You know that. We need to retreat. Now. Then kill me and take command. Black met silver, and for a terrifying moment, neither yielded. Finally, the White Fang backed down. The man uttered a litany of foul words, but held his ground and did not flee. Damn kid. In that case, need to take out as many of them as we can before that thing gets here. I hope you have a plan. Naruto grimaced. Oh, I have a few ideas. Yami chirped. Naruto nearly backhanded him for his temerity. No, we're not using that. If I bring down a meteor here it would kill everyone. For once, I'm inclined to agree, came the strange, smoke-roiling Thraug-honey voice. We're here to save lives, not end them. Ah, you're no fun, either of you. With those unhelpful hints, Naruto was left alone in his mind to face the oncoming horde. In the distance he could sense their master thundering forward, unseen, but very much heard. Yagura. The Sanbi. Damn, but how was he going to fight that? Biju versus Biju was one thing, but he hadn't perfected the Susanoo up to the point where he was confident in taking on a tailed beast. But it seemed that decision was about to be taken from him. He'd be on them soon, assuming his men didn't finish the job. He was just beginning to wonder how on earth he was going to fight and avoid that many without casualties when Hold, Konoha Shinobi. A stringent voice called. I would speak with you. Had snapped around in alarm. Interestingly enough, the clamor of the Sanbi in the distance appeared to have stopped. So too, did Shikaku and Inoichi's sabotage. The enemy force had clambered to a halt, much to their surprise. Instead of swarming them, which would have been easy, given their considerable numbers, the Kirigakure shinobi had halted a few paces out. Even from this distance, Naruto counted at least several dozen, perhaps even 100. His stomach sank. Killing such a force was well within his power, but he was loath to risk losing anyone. And he would lose some of them, of that much he was certain. A figure stepped out from the sea of angry faces before things could get out of hand. Please, he began aloud, arms spread in mollification, there's no need to bloody our hands. Let us be civilized about this. Naruto frowned. They drew him aside, and hissed angrily in his ear, her green eyes fierce. Be careful. That's Suku of the Swift Release. Yagura's right-hand man, if he's here. Then he's the real deal. You let your woman speak for you, Black Death. The man called. Come, let us speak as equals. In another life, Naruto would have rose to the challenge and started shouting. Years of war had tempered him, however. All that emerged from his stony facade was a frown. Don't. Mei argued, grabbing his arm as he stepped forward. Suku's a snake, rotten to the core. Just kill him and be done with it. Ordinarily, he would have granted such a request, but with so many eyes on them, the fate of so many innocents hanging in the balance. Sorry, that's not my way. They met in the middle, Naruto with Mikoto on his left, Tsukumo at his right. Mei took a moment, then with a quiet curse of baka, hurried after them. The ambassador, as it were, came forward alone, with no one at his back. Either this was a sign of supreme arrogance, or Suku was exceptionally skilled. Hands at either side, he held no weapons. His eyes took stock of them each in turn, lingering on the women just a touch longer than was necessary, Naruto thought. As Sugu was at all aware of the killing intent, he did precious little to show it. Then he seemed to notice Naruto as, though waking from an ephemeral dream. His eyes danced with intrigue. Naruto's first impression was that he seemed quite ordinary. Nice, even. He was tall, clad in the signature carry uniform of most jonin, with frameless glasses resting on his long face. The eyes behind the lenses were narrow lines, which made it seem as though he were smiling all the time. He was quite young, not yet 30 by Naruto's estimation. Sugu extended a hand to him. And so we meet at last. I'm Sugu Nabayuki. You must be the Black Death we've heard so much about. Your reputation precedes you. The pleasure is mine. Naruto made a point of accepting the offered limb and shaking, much to Mikoto's dismay. Interestingly enough, there was no poison dagger to greet him. Let's get down to business. We have no intention of going to war with you. We just want to get these people, and here he glanced back to Yukina and the others, out of here safely. May looked as though she were about to protest, but a harsh glare sent her words packing. I see. Sugu frowned. And you've allied yourself with this rogue, his eyes cut to May. That makes things between complicated, then. Such a pity, Terumi. I rather enjoyed working with you. The feeling isn't mutual. May hissed. Whatever you say, Sugu rubbed his fingers together audibly, as though imagining a strand of her hair between them. Something about the gesture filled Naruto with revulsion. But let us get down to business, shall we? Surrender yourself to me and you won't be harmed. Into the shocked silence that followed, he smiled, as though this of his requests were the only sensible thing for them to do. I'm sure we can learn fascinating things from those eyes of yours. What do you say, Naruto-kun? Your life for all those refugees over there. For a horrifying moment, Mikoto thought he was actually going to do it. Then he got that look in his eye, the one that promised trouble, and she felt the burden lift itself from her shoulders. Nope. No deal. Pity. He raised his head and stared into Naruto's eyes. In that instant, Naruto realized his first impression couldn't have been more wrong. Those narrow eyes featured beady pupils that gave him a wicked glare. Both corners of his mouth curled upward into a grin that could not be described as anything other than devious. A chill ran up his spine. Wrong. There was something fundamentally wrong about this man. He hadn't encountered an oily ore like this since his first fight with Orochimaru, all those years ago. I have an army. Sugu sneered, sticking his face up close to Naruto's, still wearing that demonic smirk. What do you have? We have a Naruto. Mikoto snarked. Well, then. Sugu huffed, annoyed. I see it is pointless to treat with you any longer. His eyes lingered heavily on Mikoto and May, the facade of civility dripping away as he licked his lips. As for you ladies, I'll be sure to take my time with you once I've disposed of your protectors. May snarled, Mikoto made a noise of disgust, and in that moment, all hell broke loose. Tsukumo's tento flashed out like lightning, blindingly white within the mist. At first, Naruto thought the man had done something incredibly stupid and attacked, but no, his tanto had caught the edge of a knife, meant for Naruto himself, parrying it away. Shit. He really was fast. Was this the swift release, then? Did it enable the man to move at unbelievable speed, faster than the norm light could see? Nabayuki turned aside just a little, frowning, his satisfaction turning to anger, then dismayed indignation as he realized he'd failed to assassinate his chosen target. He snarled. Filthy commoner. So sorry to disappoint you. Tsukumo's smirk deepened behind the mask, but I can't let him die just yet. Several glacial seconds passed. When Sugu moved again, this time, he saw it. Enough. Naruto grabbed his hand without thinking, hissing slightly as a dagger this one meant for Tsukumo punched through his fingers, and pulled away from the white fang. He felt his voice turn hoarse with anger, his eyes flashing a dangerous, ominous violet. Leave. But we'll be forced to kill you. Kill? Me. Sugu leered as he snatched his hand away with surprising strength. You can't fight me. Any attack on my person will bring the wrath of the Kiri down on your heads. I'm strangely okay with that. Naruto replied with a sneer of his own. Die. Now. Fool. Sugu blurred backwards even as the blackhead started forward, an errant kunai leaping into his hand. You don't stand a. Crunch. The giant blue and skeletal hand closed around him before he could make use of his superior speed. When that filthy stare dared to meet his, Naruto didn't flinch. Instead, he looked Sugu square in the eye, Mingekyo spinning, a veritable pinwheel boring itself into his vision. The smile put paid to his expression in the words that followed. I'm sorry, what was that about me not standing a chance? The bony hand squeezed as he spoke, cracking the man's ribs. Because from the way I see it, my odds just got a little more equal. Sugu sputtered, his face turning blue as he failed to draw a breath. No, wait, I can help you, Urk. His words died as the giant fist squeezed even harder. I don't want your help, you little shit. You'll be starting a war. Then this is war. The poor fool, he didn't even have time to beg for his life before Susanoo crushed him to a bloody pulp, spattering gore in every direction. The man's broken body was still falling when the Kiri forces burst out of their complacency, charging forward and baying for blood. Attack. Naruto sighed, biting his lip. Looks like it's a fight after all. Allow me. He hadn't seen Mikoto step up, but he certainly heard the intake and subsequent exhale that foretold her favorite attack, Kaden, Kakakyu no Jutsu. It was a good fireball in Naruto's opinion, a really good one. It was a sort of fireball that not even Sasuke would have criticized. Even Madara himself would be impressed. So bright that it dazzled their eyes, the fireball exploded a little further back than she had aimed. The vanguard dissolved in a roar and a flash, spars and splinters from the shattered trees lethal as 1,000 arrows loosed by master archers. Men were tossed into the air like toys. Many were already dead before they struck the ground. The enemy formation sagged and swayed in place, made uncertain by this sudden and savage display of pyrotechnic power. More timber ignited despite the humidity, tongues of fire licking up and spreading into a sheet of flame. The entire forest shuddered and shook. Tortured screams came to them over the plain. Refugees whooped and cheered at the sight. Even the shinobi cheered at the impact. Only Naruto watched in silence, inscrutable, as scores of men perished by the power of chakra. Well, Mei managed, blinking as she brushed a few stray embers from her short hairs. That's very do it again, Mikoto-san, she added, with careful courtesy at the woman's glare. Aim at the trees this time. Can't. She gasped out, I used up a huge chunk of my chakra on that one. I'm still good to fight, but I'll need time to recharge before, wah. All eyes fell on the shards of ice materializing in the air, tiny slivers almost like senbone, really hovering around them, taking form and shape from the thick mist. Ao barked a warning, telling them to stand aside. Several heads turned toward him in response and beheld young Yukina, her face taut with concentration. Naruto felt a small upswing of nostalgia, watching Haku's mother weave through one-handed signs. She was much more powerful than her child, however, even as he looked on more and more needles formed, until the air resembled something of a pincushion. As the man says, then, move away. Yukina breathed out in a wispy gasp, and the ice needles stilled, points directed at the recovering enemy flank. Her hands swayed in an angry, savage gesture and the deadly shards flew forward. Still disorganized by the flames somewhat, most were unprepared for the ensuing shower of icy death. Some, unfortunately, saw the attacks coming, and managed to avoid having their vitals pierced. Some, but not all. Naruto estimated that a third of the enemy force had been eliminated by now, not counting the chaos Shikaku's shadow, and Inoichi's mind destruction wrought on the ranks. But the shock of the elemental onslaught had worn off now, and even from here, he could see some producing hand signs, and oh, that was a large one. Inoichi. Shikaku. Back. Now. Naruto called out, recognizing the jutsu. I'm up. Tsukumo. With me. Inoichi and Shikaku wheeled back towards the group, discarding their cloaks in the same movement as they fell back into the ranks. Tsukumo alone chose to retain his hold on the garment, though the foul look in his eye said it was purely to spite the enemy more than anything else. A tanto flashed in his hand, gleaming a grisly white. Ah. So that was how he'd acquired the moniker of the White Fang. The White Fang and the Black Death. Had a nice ring to it, but that was a thought for another time. Now it was time for defense. Naruto stepped forward, hands weaving the signs needed, and, sure enough, the White Fang joined him a heartbeat later. Doten, Doryuhaki. Rather than simply vomit the mud needed as Tsukumo did, Naruto instead slapped both hands down upon the ground and channeled a massive amount of chakra into his palms. The earth itself responded, springing up in buttress of stone and soil, towering high over their heads, bathing them in misty shadows. Naruto leapt up over it, shooting skyward as the earthen rampart carried him up through the mists. And not a moment too soon. No sooner had the earth wall reached its full height than it shuddered, shaking as massive missile of hardened water collided against it. 5 shinobi had worked together to create that massive watery missile, but despite their cooperation, the twin earth walls held on the east and western side. This bird's eye view was precisely what he needed. He could see them down there, foolishly grouped together. And they could see him. Timed all but ground to a halt as the Mingekyo Sharingan flared in his eyes. My turn. Susanoo bristled around him, knocking an arrow on its longbow. Then 2, 3, 4, 5. Naruto took aim with the deadly blue-black specter, sighting down at the quintet of Jonin with intent. The chakra string of its massive twine bristled, stretched taut. He held it for a moment longer, reading the tiny bodies below, predicting the directions in which they would scatter. Then he let the missiles fly. Twang. Like heavenly javelins, 5 arrows flew, straight and true. The first 3 were skewered almost before they realized what was happening, and by the time their comrades realized what was going on, Naruto had wrought havoc on them. He didn't bother to stay and watch as his arrows found the 4th ninja, then the 5th. He let a 6th fly for good measure, scattering the enemy shinobi still further. And that was when he saw the very large shape surging forward in the distance. Somehow, he couldn't bring himself to feel any fear at the sight of the Sanbi, gaining though it was. Only annoyance. Playtime was over. He needed to wrap this up now. Groping back to the earth, Naruto let the earth wall crumble, and flared the Rinnegan in his eyes, ignoring the odd whispers the legendary Jujutsu stained his eyes violet. And he inhaled. Mikoto hissed, recognizing the technique. By the time she had the wherewithal to cover her ears, the reincarnated Uchiha had already let loose a volley of hellfire. Kaden. Goku Mikaku. This blaze made the last one look tame. A veritable wall of molten death exploded from Naruto's mouth, lacking restraint and flowing outward in a massive sea of flame. Some of the enemy tried to deflect him with water walls of their own, but the blaze was a life of its own now, plowing through their feeble defenses to immolate any who stood before it. Another third perished in that cruel conflagration. The flames and mists were just the cover Naruto needed to finish the rest. He had no way of knowing that the Tsuchikage had a hand in this, dropping hints to the mad Mizukage that Konoha shinobi were in his territory. Of course Yagura, crazed as he was, would respond with force, attack any who dared to trespass on his lands. Naruto didn't care. There was no time to care. Scooping up Yoruichi in one arm, he unceremoniously tossed the dark-skinned girl towards Shikaku with an audible grunt. The tiny girl shrieked in surprise before the Naru caught her. By the look on Shikaku's face, you might think he'd just been handed a poisonous snake. What the hell am I supposed to do with her? Keep her safe. Mei and the precious few ninja he'd recruited closed in around him, not bearing knives to stab him as he'd suspected. Instead they did something miraculous. They closed ranks, forming a defensive perimeter. Ah, it all made sense now. Yagura had sent the core of the dissenters here to this village, those who might be swayed to leave Kiri behind in search of a better life. Too many. There are too many of them, and not enough of his allies. Looking closer he could see soldiers' militia, amongst them as well, infantrymen armed with pikes, swords, and the like. He was going all in. Bile rose in the back of his throat. It was going to be a massacre. Just like that day. Fire flashed before his vision. Naruto shook his head, but the memory persisted regardless. The smell of sulfur filled his nose. Ash on his skin. The sky, burning. No. This wasn't happening. This was the past. He'd been here before. It was the same. Only a few miles east from here, he'd watched Madara slaughter Mei and the Kurgaku resistance. And it was about to happen again, this time at the hands of Yagura. No. He couldn't let this happen. Not again. No, 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 no. Tsukumo must have seen the look in his eye, because he tried to grab him. Instead, his fist closed around empty air. Idiot. Don't you dare. Without thinking, he jumped. 1. Launching himself through the air in a wide arc, he began to count down the seconds until he would be able to push again. The air boiled around him like a thing alive, the mists writhing and shifting before the pressure of his sudden ascent and then his descent, violently resisting as he streaked up out of village and towards the forest. He needed to reach the enemy before they hit the village. No, he would. There was no room for any of the doubts that plagued him here. Do or do not. There is no try. 2. Naruto bellowed a challenge in mid-leap, calling all eyes unto him. Enemy shinobi looked up, pointing. Kunai, shuriken, and a few hastily fired water jutsu flew at him in a storm of water and blades. The Uchiha burned Susanoo in his right arm and swatted them aside, shattering them as though they were sticks. With his other hand he formed a bow of bone and fire, knocking back an arrow in his arm. One eye squinted shut, sighting down his target. Targus. Blue fire brimmed at its edges, snapping forward now as he released the string. Earth cratered. Bodies burned, perforated and immolated. Someone screamed. 3. Succumbing to gravity at last, Naruto landed directly in the enemy's center, the last embers of Susanoo smoldering softly around him as it faded. There was a quiet moment as the soldiers and shinobi turned in surprise. Naruto crouched amid them, pieces of shattered steel and smoldering flames raining down from the sky. The countdown in his head reached a crescendo as the shock of landing raced through his sandals, the very earth shifting beneath his feet as he took the chakra and molded it within, gathering it, compacting it. 4. Then he pushed. 5. He flared chakra with a yell, standing and thrusting the full might of the Shinra Tensei outward in a dome of pure spite. The burst of godlike power hurled shinobi away by their flak jackets, tossing a dozen men into the air, sending some crashing into trees and their companions, reducing others little more than gory smears on the ground. He had just enough time to shout out an order to his allies, then, those far back enough to resist the almighty push swarmed him in a sea of elements and blades. Mostly blades. Wow, those were some large shuriken. His hand latched onto the nearest carrion he could find and yanked, hulling the startling man off his feet. A savage headbutt rendered the poor fellow insensitive, rendering his back little more than a fleshy mean shield for flying projectiles. He quivered once, cried out, and was still. Naruto didn't bother to wait, tossing the corpse aside into one of his attackers. Before drawing a knife, the larger war fan was all but useless at such range and flinging himself into the fray. What followed next was little more than a blood-soaked blur. This close, there was no room for any of his larger area effect jutsu, and with so many bodies pressing in around him, it was nearly impossible to tell friend from foe. He fought, slashed, and killed as he never had ever done in his life. He fought until he was covered in blood, some his own, some that of the enemy, and kept fighting, breaking necks, snapping bones, always killing, crushing, dismembering, eviscerating. Rational thoughts ceased to be, replaced only by the blinding urge to protect everyone, to make sure not a single soul left this place alive. The Black Death. Haraishin carried him amidst the enemy like a bloody wraith. Whomever he touched became a walking target, a mark for him to use as he pleased. Within the first few seconds he branded nearly the entire enemy force on his own, and countless more had fallen to his deadly taijutsu, others, brutal crosscuts from a kunai. In the back of his mind, Naruto began to understand just how Madara had laid waste to most of the allied army by himself so long ago. It was the Sharingan. Even here in the thick murk of the mist, everything seemed to move in slow motion. With these eyes, he could see everyone. Everything. Their moves were painfully obvious, telegraphed to him by these unholy orbs. Coupled with Haraishin, well, it gave him a sizable handicap. So this was how his dad had become so deadly. So infamous. Haraishin wasn't just a teleportation jutsu, it was a damned army killer. And he took full advantage. The kunai shot past with an explosive tag attached, momentarily breaking the iron chain of his thoughts. Scoffing, he caught the note and peeled it away, even as the knife flew harmlessly by, then slapped it onto a nearby shinobi before kicking him, shrieking, into his fellows. The ensuing blast of fire and flame that followed after was particularly satisfying. One shinobi managed to fire off a water bullet. Naruto simply flared the Rinnegan's power, and absorbed the ninjutsu, adding to his well of chakra, strengthening him, revitalizing him more than ever before. Despite his best efforts to the contrary, Naruto felt himself sneering at the man's hopeless expression. He raised a hand, fingers splayed. Kami, this was almost unfair. For him. Sorry, he whispered, a knife of real guilt stabbing at his breast as he saw the terror of their own death in each of their eyes. I wish it didn't have to be this way. In the next instant a wall of solid, invisible force roared forward, to meet the enemy shinobi, flattening him and his fellows to the ground. Then another and another and another, until there was nothing left on the forlorn field, but broken bodies and bloody paste. No one rose to fight him, all was silent, save the ever-closing clamor of the Sanbi in the distance. Naruto lowered his palm and listened, feeling wretched in the silence. He really was a murderer, now. It was almost anticlimactic. He killed them. Killed them all. A small globule of lava whizzed overhead, snapping him out of his self-imposed sorrows. The would-be assassin closing at his flank shrieked in agony, clawing furiously at himself, as the jutsu caught him full in the chest, but to no avail. Burning through Kevlar and flesh. In short order, he was gone. Naruto risked a glance over his shoulder, smiling in relief. Mei shot him a saucy wink, and then she was gone, stalking towards one of the bodies, still twitching on the ground. Naruto realized what he was doing and called out for her to spare him. Leave that one alive. He snapped, pointing. I want answers. The blood rage was fading now, replaced by an icy calm. Yukina and Ao were doing their level best to settle the startled refugees. Somewhere behind him, little Yoruichi was crying. A steadfast Shikaku stood near her, his strangling shadow slowly slipping from the corpse of the man who tried to do her harm. Tsukumo stood over a prone Yukitaka, who, it seemed, had tried to make trouble after all. Inoichi looked as though he'd seen the Reaper itself, and Mikoto was furiously kicking Suku's corpse, not caring for the blood on her sandals. A bloody cut on her cheek told him she'd seen fighting as well. Bastard. Prick. Ass. She shouted, the rest of her rant nearly unintelligible. Not so smug now, are you not so tough now, huh? Naruto heard and saw it all, and with steel in his heart, he stalked toward the lone survivor, gripped him by the collar, and in his most calm, implacable voice, snarled. You are going to tell me who informed you of our presence here. How much pain you endured beforehand, that is up to you. He said emotionlessly. No? Then we'll be doing this the hard way, Tebeo. When the man refused to answer, he flared his Sharingan, and forced the truth out of him. A mere minute in the hell of Tsukuyomi had the poor prisoner singing like a songbird. It was the Tsuchikage. He bleated, choking on his blood. He sent our lord a letter. That was how we knew you'd be here. Please. Don't kill me. We didn't know. Inoki. Lovely. Which means we have spies in our villages. Why is it always spies? He snarked, annoyed. Sneaky, dirty, backstabbing. I know we're all shinobi here, but it's just so uncivilized. When the baffled man refused to answer him, Naruto mercifully cut his throat, sparing him the slow agony of suffocating to death, with all that fluid in his lungs. Turning back to them, he opened his mouth to speak. He didn't have long to wait. No sooner had he settled his stance than the Sanbi came crashing through the forest. Naruto nearly balked at the sheer size of it, remembering the creature he'd faced down all those years ago. It was not an experience he cared to revisit, but he would, if he must. Like a giant warrior straight out of ancient times, the perfect Susanoo rose around him, a silent sentinel of Bushido, its wings flaring wide. Blue and black chakra flickered around him as he conjured up a blade in hand, a sword capable of slicing mountains in twine. He stepped forward, ready to meet the beast blow for blow. And then everything went pear-shaped. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created, and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.